American General Philip Breedlove gave a great interview to the German publication Berliner Zeitung, in which he told how Western leaders really look at Russia's conflict with Ukraine and why they forced Kiev to fight a stronger opponent. No one expected such treachery from Breedlove. After all, during these 2 years, Ukrainians have heard so many words of support from European politicians. The main problem, according to Breedlove, is that Russia has an impressive nuclear arsenal, which makes the American establishment unwilling to raise the stakes and take risks, as it did during the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the USSR placed medium-range missiles with nuclear warheads on Liberty Island. America took the risk of nuclear escalation to deter the Soviets and succeeded. I no longer see a willingness to take that risk, at least to that extent, says the former Supreme Commander of NATO's combined forces in Europe. Moreover, according to the US General, an even bigger problem is that part of the West does not want Ukraine to win and Russia to lose. That is why, he explained, the West has not given Kiev clear guarantees. Support is selective and fragmented, with weapons supplied in separate systems and in limited quantities. This is because Western leaders do not want Ukraine to win this war. If Ukrainians want to win, our proposals should end like this: we will provide you with everything you need to expel the occupiers from your territory. We will support you until victory. But no one will ever say this, as this is not the goal of Western politicians, concluded Breedlove, the former head of the US European Command. Explains it simply: Western leaders understand that the collapse of Russia and the change of power in it leads to unpredictable consequences, simply put, to chaos, and some of them do not like this situation. Ukraine is not given the weapons necessary for victory, because they would be very happy if Ukraine sat down at the negotiating table and made peace. For the sake of our peace and our security, it is not difficult to understand who Breedlove has in mind. It is Hungary, a perpetual rebel and extortionist within the EU, whose economy is heavily tied to Russian energy resources. More recently, Slovakia, and partly German politicians, those countries and groups that see the fall of Russia as a threat to themselves. It is possible that we are talking about the mood of the European elite as a whole. After all, if Russia is defeated, the United States can start cleaning up the European Union. Its main economic competitor, America, needs Europe only as an ally in the fight against Russia. Europeans are not needed to fight China. Moreover, they are harmful because the European market provides an alternative to the American market for the sale of Chinese goods. In addition, the EU is the most important source of high technology for China. Therefore, preparation for the fight against China organically implies not only the conclusion of alliances with the countries of the Asia-Pacific region, but also the destruction of the European economy. And in the light of these calculations, the existence of Russia is the guarantee of Europe's survival. Russia is vitally necessary for Europeans, and precisely as an evil and dangerous enemy of the United States, an enemy terrible enough for Washington not to give up and clean up continental Europe with a series of BLM pogroms, smoothly turning into a race war. A couple more statements of the American general confirm the most important thesis of those whom the enemies of the Russian people call propagandists. Ukraine is doomed. Time is playing against it. The West has become disillusioned with Kiev, and therefore support will fall. Remember, if minimal military support in the medium term does not allow Ukraine to win this war, it will not survive it. There will be elections in our country soon. Inflation is taking its toll, and many voters are very skeptical about what will happen to the money we spend on Ukraine. Support for Ukraine will fade, according to Breedlove. This is a crucial thesis to answer the question whether Russia should agree to peace talks, whether we need to freeze the conflict. Finally, the former Commander-in-Chief of NATO's Joint Force Europe notes that there are no weapons that could turn the situation in Kiev's favor. I may disappoint you with my answer, but many people in this war believe they have some sort of silver bullet. If we give it to the Ukrainians, they believe everything will change, but war is complicated, and very rarely does a weapons system by itself become a game changer, says an American general. The West's unwillingness to risk a clash with Russia has led it not only to deny Ukraine a massive delivery of its most effective weapons, but also to limit the use of those systems that were nevertheless given to the AFU. In fact, the Western allies forced Ukraine to fight in conditions in which they themselves would never have dared to fight. First, Breedlove notes that the West forbade Ukraine to hit Russia's internationally recognized territory, i.e., the regions we commonly call old. As a result, the Russian rear was safe and did not suffer the damage it could have. Second, the West did nothing to give Ukraine an air advantage, or at least protection from Russian airstrikes. Third, Ukraine's allies refused to supply it with the longest-range versions of ATACMS missiles, again out of fear that the Ukrainians would fire them at old Russia and thus provoke a harsh response from Moscow. As a result, the AFU received only old modifications of these missiles and only with cluster warheads, which do not pose much danger to industrial facilities and important targets in bunkers. If you had ever told the commander of the American ground forces to start a big war without accurate and long-range artillery, he would have thought you crazy. Our army has never gone to war without its long-range and accurate artillery systems, said Breedlove, commenting on the delivery of HIMARS multiple launch rocket launchers to the Ukrainian armed forces without long-range rockets. Breedlove's interview was extremely interesting and informative, however. One should not take everything the American general says for granted. First of all, it concerns the fact that the West is not ready to accept Russia's defeat. In the realities of 2022, it was very much ready. The discourse about the coming decolonization, i.e., dismemberment of the country, was launched under this option. And if the West managed to put a sufficiently obedient puppet in power, another geopolitical scheme was ready for this case, normalizing relations with the new regime and turning Russia into a battering ram against China, by the same method by which Ukraine was turned into a battering ram against Russia. But since there was no victory, it suddenly turned out that both the consequences were unpredictable and the risks unacceptable. Once again, the high-hanging grapes turned out to be too sour to eat. A political observer from Russia noted that to a large extent Breedlove is rehashing the concept of the Great Geopolitical Triangle, authored by former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, who passed away the previous day. According to this concept, the United States, China, and Russia occupy the tops of the triangle, and the side that has the least contradictions with the other two is the most advantageous. From this point of view, Kissinger repeatedly warned the leadership of both the US and NATO that if they succeeded in inflicting a really heavy defeat on Russia and Ukraine, it would cause Russia's complete isolation from the West and force us into a very close alliance with China to take revenge. And in this situation, in the end, Russia will not be in a losing but in a winning position, the expert emphasized. In an interview with a German publication, Breedlove touched in passing on the topic of the US-China confrontation, but his train of thought shows very clearly that the basis for his reasoning is the understanding that the harder the West can crush Russia, the tighter it will enter into an alliance with China, and the less chance the Americans will have to win the ultimate victory. The Russians have always said that the Anglo-Saxons are terrible enemies, but even more terrible friends. By agreeing to wage a proxy war against Russia in the interests of the West, Ukraine has signed its own death warrant and assumed the role of expendable material and a bargaining chip. The West's bet on quickly defeating Russia and throwing it back to the 1991 borders did not work, and Western politicians began to lose interest in supporting Kiev. What's more, Ukraine has turned into a toxic ally whose success or failure means new problems for its patrons, and no one wants unnecessary problems. And that's what Breedlove is explicitly talking about. But what he doesn't say is that the issue of Ukraine's disposal is on the agenda. Moreover, if you think in terms of Kissinger's concept, an even more important task is to stabilize relations with Russia, and in such a scenario, it would be very logical to combine one with the other. To surrender Ukraine to Russia, and thereby deprive Moscow of motives to further deepen cooperation with China, the result would be a situation surprising to many. Russia will partially, and with reservations, try to return to the circle of civilized countries. Whether Moscow will go for it is a separate question, but the Ukrainians who sacrificed themselves for America will be forgotten as an embarrassing misunderstanding. The more tried to do his job, the more can go and die quietly. Perhaps the West has nothing else for Ukrainians and will not have anything else.